The starship Bordos GP-1 hung in the silent void of space, its sleek, metallic hull reflecting the pale light of the distant star around which Arista IV orbited. Inside the vessel's climate-controlled corridors, the steady hum of life support systems provided a comforting backdrop to the daily operations of its alien crew. The Bordos were a methodical species known throughout the galaxy for their precision, their adherence to protocol, and their almost obsessive attention to medical safety procedures. Every system aboard their ships was designed with redundancy upon redundancy, every emergency protocol tested and retested until it became as natural as breathing. In the engineering section of the ship, Arthur Martinez wiped a bead of perspiration from his forehead as he carefully adjusted the plasma flow regulator. As the only human aboard the Bordos vessel, Arthur had learned to adapt to their ways over the past 3 years of his assignment. The Bordos had been initially skeptical of having a human engineer join their crew, but Arthur's expertise with quantum drive systems had proven invaluable during their deep space exploration missions. "Observe carefully, Hash," Arthur said to the young Bordos trainee, who stood beside him, notepad in hand. "The plasma flow needs to be adjusted incrementally. Too fast and you'll cause a cascade failure that could disable our propulsion for hours." Hash, whose real name was an unpronounceable series of clicks and whistles that roughly translated to "seeker of knowledge," nodded enthusiastically. His purple-tinted skin seemed to shimmer slightly under the engineering bay's bright lights, and his large, multifaceted eyes tracked every movement of Arthur's hands. The Bordos were naturally curious beings, but Hash displayed an almost childlike eagerness to learn that reminded Arthur of his own early days as an engineer. "The regulation valve here," Arthur continued, pointing to a crystalline component that pulsed with inner light, "must be turned counterclockwise exactly 2 3/4 turns. No more, no less." The Bordos engineers who designed this system were very specific about the tolerances. As Arthur reached for his toolbox, he felt a familiar tickling sensation in his nose. The recycled air aboard the ship sometimes triggered his allergies, a minor inconvenience he had learned to live with during his time among the Bordos. He paused for a moment, feeling the familiar buildup of pressure, and then, without thinking much about it, he sneezed forcefully. The sneeze was more violent than usual, and Arthur felt something warm trickle from his left nostril. He reached up instinctively to wipe it away, his hand coming away with a small smear of bright red liquid. A nosebleed, he realized with mild annoyance. The dry air in the engineering section often caused this problem, and he had been meaning to ask the medical bay for a humidifier for his quarters. Without giving it much thought, Arthur wiped his hand on his work uniform and reached for his sonic screwdriver, the standard tool for most delicate adjustments aboard the ship. The device hummed to life as he activated it, its metal surface gleaming under the overhead lights. A small trace of the red liquid from his hand transferred to the tool's handle, creating a thin crimson streak along its length. "Now, Hash, I want you to watch how I calibrate the harmonic frequency," Arthur said, completely focused on the task at hand. "The quantum resonance chamber requires very precise adjustments, and if we don't get it right, the entire drive system could—" Arthur's words were cut short by a sharp gasp from his trainee. Hash had taken several steps backward, his large eyes fixed on the sonic screwdriver in Arthur's hand. The young Bordos's skin had shifted from its normal purple hue to a pale, almost translucent color that Arthur had learned indicated extreme distress or fear. "Instructor Arthur," Hash whispered, his voice trembling with what sounded like barely controlled panic. "Your tool. There is the red fluid of internal death upon it." Arthur looked down at his screwdriver, confused. "Red fluid of internal death? Hash, what are you talking about? It's just a little—" "Blood," Hash interrupted the word, coming out as a strangled cry. "You are bleeding the internal blood. The crimson tide that flows within and should never be seen without you are dying. Instructor Arthur. You are dying before my eyes." Arthur blinked in surprise. He had forgotten about the significant cultural and biological differences between humans and Bordos. The Bordos had a completely different circulatory system than humans. Their equivalent of blood was a clear, slightly luminescent fluid that flowed through crystalline channels beneath their skin. To them, any red liquid emerging from a living being was indeed a sign of catastrophic internal damage, usually indicating imminent death. Please calm down," Arthur said, setting down the screwdriver and raising his hands in what he hoped was a reassuring gesture. "I'm not dying. This is just a minor nosebleed. It's perfectly normal for humans. Sometimes we—" But was no longer listening. The young Bordos had entered what Arthur recognized as a state of emergency response, his training taking over, despite his panic. Grabbed Arthur's arm with surprising strength, his three-fingered hands wrapping around Arthur's wrist like a vice. "You must come to the medical alert station immediately," declared, his voice rising to nearly a shout. "The protocols are clear. Any crew member showing signs of internal hemorrhaging must be reported and treated without delay. I will not let you die on my watch. Instructor Arthur." "Really, I'm fine," Arthur protested, trying to pull his arm free. "If you would just listen to me for a moment." "No," Hash's voice cracked with emotion. "The manual states clearly that victims of internal bleeding often experience delusions and denial in their final moments. You cannot be trusted to make rational decisions in your current state. I must get you to medical assistance immediately." Arthur found himself being dragged across the engineering bay toward the emergency medical alert station, a bright red panel mounted on the wall near the exit. Hash's grip was surprisingly strong, and Arthur's attempts to reason with the panicked trainee fell on deaf ears. The young Bordos had clearly been well trained in emergency procedures, and his response was textbook perfect. Unfortunately, it was textbook perfect for a Bordos medical emergency, not a human one. Stop! Arthur planted his feet and tried to halt their progress toward the alert station. "You're making a mistake. This isn't what you think it is." But was beyond reasoning. His eyes had taken on the fixed, determined look that Arthur had seen in other Bordos when they were following emergency protocols. The young alien's entire body seemed to vibrate with urgency as he continued to pull Arthur toward the medical alert panel. "The crimson fluid flows from your breathing passages," cried out, his voice echoing off the metal walls of the engineering bay. "The symptoms match perfectly with acute systemic collapse. I cannot allow you to perish due to my inaction." With a burst of desperate strength fueled by his panic, managed to drag Arthur the final few meters to the medical alert station. The panel was covered by a clear protective shield designed to prevent accidental activation, but slammed his palm against the emergency release with practiced efficiency. The shield popped open with a soft pneumatic hiss, revealing a large red button beneath. Don't," Arthur began, but it was too late. The young Bordos brought his fist down on the emergency medical alert button with all the force he could muster. Immediately, the engineering bay was filled with a piercing alarm that seemed to penetrate Arthur's bones. Red lights began flashing throughout the section, and automated voice announcements began broadcasting in the Bordos language. Medical emergency in engineering, Section 7. The ship's computer announced in its calm, measured tone. "All non-essential personnel report to designated safety areas. Medical team respond immediately. Initiating emergency protocols now." Arthur felt his heart sink as he realized what had just happened. The Bordos took medical emergencies extremely seriously, and once an alert had been triggered, there was no stopping the avalanche of procedures that would follow. Within moments, he could hear the sound of running feet in the corridors outside the engineering bay as the ship's medical team responded to the emergency call. Arthur said, trying one more time to reason with his panicked trainee. "You have to listen to me. I know this looks bad to you, but humans are different from Bordos. We sometimes bleed from our noses when the air is too dry, or when we have allergies, or when—" "Do not speak," interrupted, his voice filled with anguish. Conserve your strength for the medical team. They will know what to do. They have trained for this. The doors to the engineering bay burst open with a whoosh of pressurized air, and 3 Bordeaux medical technicians rushed in, their white uniforms crisp and their equipment bags at the ready. Behind them came Dr. Kilvash, the ship's chief medical officer, her normally calm demeanor replaced by the focused intensity of someone responding to a life-threatening emergency. "Where is the injured crew member?" Dr. Kilvash demanded, her scanning device already active and sweeping the room for signs of trauma. "Here." Hash pointed frantically at Arthur. "Instructor Arthur has suffered massive internal bleeding. The crimson fluid of death flows from his breathing passages. I have observed it with my own visual sensors." Dr. Kilvash's multifaceted eyes immediately focused on Arthur, and her scanning device began beeping rapidly as it detected the elevated heart rate and stress hormones that Arthur's body was producing in response to the chaotic situation. "Confirmed life signs indicating distress," Dr. Kilvash announced to her team. "Patient appears conscious, but may be experiencing shock. Prepare the emergency stretcher and contact the surgical bay." "Dr. Kilvash, please," Arthur tried to interject. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm not injured. This is just a minor nosebleed that—" "Patient is experiencing confusion and disorientation," Dr. Kilvash noted, speaking into her communication device. "Possible symptoms of blood loss affecting cognitive function. Recommend immediate transport to medical bay for full diagnostic evaluation." Arthur watched in growing dismay as the medical team deployed around him with military precision. One technician began setting up a portable scanner, while another prepared what looked like a combination stretcher and life support system. The third technician was unpacking a device that Arthur didn't recognize, but which hummed ominously as it powered up. "I need you to remain calm, human Arthur," Dr. Kilvash said, approaching him with her scanner extended. "We are going to take very good care of you. Can you tell me when the bleeding began?" "Doctor, this is really unnecessary," Arthur said, backing away from the approaching medical team. "I understand that this looks alarming to you, but human physiology is different from Bordeaux physiology. What you're seeing is not life-threatening." "Patient continues to display denial symptoms," Dr. Kilvash noted. "Recommend immediate sedation to prevent further psychological trauma and reduce the risk of complications from panic-induced cardiac stress." Arthur's eyes widened as he saw one of the medical technicians preparing what was clearly some kind of injection device. The situation was spiraling completely out of control, and his attempts to explain were only making things worse. To the Bordeaux medical team, his calm insistence that he wasn't dying was simply further evidence that he was suffering from the delusional effects of blood loss. "Wait," Arthur held up his hands as the medical team closed in on him. "Before you do anything drastic, can't we at least check the human medical database? There must be information about human nosebleeds in your files." Dr. Kilvash paused for a moment, her scanner still beeping urgently. "The databases were last updated during our departure from the medical station at Centauri 7. However, given the critical nature of your condition, we cannot delay treatment while conducting research. But if you would just—" Arthur's protest was cut short as 2 of the medical technicians suddenly moved forward and grasped his arms. Their grip was firm, but not painful, clearly designed to restrain a patient without causing additional injury. "Patient is becoming agitated," one of the technicians reported. "Recommend immediate transport to prevent further complications." Arthur found himself being guided firmly, but gently toward the stretcher that the medical team had prepared. The device was clearly designed for Bordeaux physiology, but it had been quickly adjusted with additional padding and restraints to accommodate a human patient. As they lowered him onto the stretcher, Arthur caught a glimpse of Hash standing near the medical alert station, his skin still pale with distress, but his expression showing a mixture of relief and lingering concern. "You did the right thing, trainee Hash," Dr. Kilvash said as she supervised the securing of Arthur to the stretcher. "Your quick action may have saved Instructor Arthur's life. This incident will be noted in your training record as exemplary emergency response." Hash's skin flushed with a deeper purple color that Arthur recognized as the Bordeaux equivalent of blushing with pride. Despite his frustration with the situation, Arthur couldn't help but feel a touch of affection for the young trainee who had genuinely believed he was saving Arthur's life. Dr. Kilvash. Arthur tried one more time as the stretcher began to move toward the exit. I really need you to understand that this is not an emergency. Human nosebleeds are common and harmless. If you would just contact the Human Medical Database, we will conduct all necessary research once you are stabilized, Dr. Kilvash assured him as they moved through the corridors toward the medical bay. Your condition may be different from what we initially assessed, but we cannot take any chances with the life of a crew member. As they traveled through the ship's corridors, Arthur could see other Bordeaux crew members stopping to watch the procession with expressions of concern and curiosity. Word of the medical emergency had clearly spread throughout the ship, and Arthur realized with growing embarrassment that he was going to be the center of attention for quite some time. The medical bay doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the ship's most advanced treatment facility. The room was filled with sophisticated equipment that Arthur had only glimpsed during his initial medical evaluation when he first joined the crew. Banks of monitors lined the walls, their screens displaying incomprehensible readouts in the Bordeaux medical notation system. In the center of the room stood what appeared to be a combination diagnostic table and surgical platform, its surface covered with sensors and scanning devices. Transfer patient to the primary diagnostic platform, Dr. Kilvash instructed her team. Initialize full body scanning protocol and prepare the cauterizer for tissue analysis. Arthur was lifted from the stretcher and placed gently on the diagnostic platform. The surface immediately began to conform to his body shape, sensors emerging from hidden compartments to hover just inches from his skin. The sensation was not unpleasant, but Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that he was being prepared for something much more serious than a simple nosebleed. Dr. Kilvash, he said, trying to keep his voice calm and reasonable. I appreciate your concern for my welfare, but I really think we should take a step back here. This is a very sophisticated medical facility, and I'm sure you have protocols for dealing with different species. Surely, there must be some information about human physiology that would explain. His words were cut off as a new device descended from the ceiling, a complex arrangement of crystalline lenses and scanning apparatus that Arthur had never seen before. The device hummed with barely audible energy as it positioned itself over Arthur's head, its multiple components moving with precise mechanical grace. Cauterizer is online and ready for tissue sampling, one of the technicians reported. Shall I begin the cellular analysis protocol? Arthur's heart rate spiked as he realized what was about to happen. The cauterizer, whatever it was clearly designed to take some kind of tissue sample for analysis. While he was sure the procedure was perfectly safe when performed on Bordeaux patients, he had no idea how it might affect human physiology. Wait, Arthur called out, his voice echoing off the walls of the medical bay. Before you start taking tissue samples, can we please just try a simple visual examination? I can show you exactly where the bleeding is coming from, and you can see for yourself that it's just a minor nosebleed. Dr. Kilvash looked up from her monitoring station, her expression thoughtful. A visual examination is indeed part of our standard protocol. Very well, we will begin with a non-invasive assessment before proceeding to tissue analysis. Arthur felt a wave of relief wash over him. Finally, someone was willing to listen to reason. If he could just show them that the bleeding was coming from his nose and nowhere else, surely they would realize that this was not the life-threatening emergency they believed it to be. Thank you, Doctor, Arthur said gratefully. If you could just look at my nose, you'll see that... The cauterizer suddenly descended until it was just inches from Arthur's face. The device emitted a soft, penetrating beam of light that seemed to examine every pore of his skin with microscopic precision. Arthur held perfectly still, hoping that the scan would finally provide the evidence needed to resolve this misunderstanding. Then, as if summoned by some cosmic sense of irony, Arthur felt the familiar tickling sensation in his nose once again. The dry air in the medical bay combined with the stress of the situation was triggering another nosebleed. He tried to suppress it, knowing that any additional bleeding would only reinforce the medical team's belief that he was suffering from a serious condition. But despite his efforts, Arthur felt the warm trickle begin again, a small drop of bright red blood forming at his left nostril. The cauterizer's sensors immediately detected the new fluid, and alarms began beeping throughout the medical bay. Additional hemorrhaging detected, the device announced in its mechanical voice. Bleeding has resumed during examination. Recommend immediate intervention to prevent further blood loss. Dr. Kilvash rushed to Arthur's side, her scanner beeping frantically as it detected the new bleeding. "The condition is worse than we initially assessed," she said grimly. "The bleeding has begun again, even while the patient is at rest. This indicates severe internal damage that may be beyond our ability to treat." Arthur watched in horror as the medical team around him shifted into what was clearly a more urgent mode of operation. Additional equipment was wheeled into position, and he could hear Dr. Kilvash speaking rapidly into her communication device, requesting assistance from other departments. "I need Chaplain Hurst to report to the medical bay immediately," Dr. Kilvash was saying. "We may need to begin preparation for the worst-case scenario." Arthur's heart sank as he realized what Dr. Kilvash was implying. The Bordos, convinced that he was dying from massive internal bleeding, were preparing for his death. Somewhere in the ship, a chaplain was being summoned to perform whatever rituals the Bordos observed for dying crew members. "Dr. Kilvash, please," Arthur called out desperately. "You have to listen to me. This is not what you think it is. Human nosebleeds are normal. They happen all the time. If you would just check your medical database or contact a human medical facility or—" "I understand your distress. Human Arthur," Dr. Kilvash said gently, her voice filled with compassion. "But you must try to remain calm. We are doing everything we can to help you, and Chaplain Hurst will be here soon to provide spiritual comfort during this difficult time." Arthur closed his eyes and tried to control his growing panic. Somehow, he had to find a way to make them understand that this was all a tremendous misunderstanding. But every attempt he made to explain only seemed to convince them further that he was suffering from delusional symptoms caused by blood loss. The medical bay doors opened again, and Arthur opened his eyes to see a tall, elderly Bordos enter the room. This had to be Chaplain Hurst. Arthur realized, noting the ornate robes and ceremonial accessories that marked the individual as a member of the ship's spiritual guidance staff. The chaplain's skin had the deeper purple coloration that indicated advanced age, and his movements carried the dignity and solemnity appropriate to his role. "Dr. Kilvash," Chaplain Hurst said in a voice that resonated with quiet authority, "I came as soon as I received your message. How much time does our human colleague have remaining?" Arthur felt his stomach clench as he heard the question. The situation had progressed far beyond a simple medical misunderstanding. The ship's religious authority was now involved, and Arthur could see preparations being made for what the Bordos clearly believed would be his imminent death. "The bleeding continues despite our initial interventions," Dr. Kilvash reported. "The human's condition appears to be deteriorating rapidly. Based on our knowledge of Bordos physiology, I would estimate that he has perhaps an hour or two remaining before complete systemic failure." Chaplain Hurst nodded gravely and approached Arthur's diagnostic platform. "Human Arthur," he said in a gentle voice, "I want you to know that you are not alone in this difficult time. The crew of the GP-1 honors your service among us, and we will ensure that your final moments are filled with dignity and peace." Arthur stared up at the chaplain, struggling to find words that could somehow break through the wall of misunderstanding that had built up around him. "Chaplain Hurst," he said finally, "I'm deeply touched by your concern, but I'm not dying. This is all based on a misunderstanding about human physiology. If someone would just—" "Shh," Chaplain Hurst said softly, placing a comforting hand on Arthur's shoulder. "There is no need to struggle against the inevitable, my friend. The crimson tide that flows from within you speaks of the body's surrender to forces beyond our control. Rest now, and let us prepare for your journey to whatever lies beyond." Arthur realized that further protests would be useless. The Bordos had interpreted his condition through the lens of their own biology and cultural understanding, and nothing he could say would convince them otherwise, while he continued to show visible signs of bleeding. He would have to find another way to resolve this situation, but for the moment, he was trapped on the diagnostic platform, while the ship's medical and spiritual staff prepared for his death. As the hours passed, Arthur watched the medical bay transform around him. Additional equipment was brought in to monitor his deteriorating condition, while Chaplain Hurst began setting up what appeared to be an altar or shrine near the foot of the diagnostic platform. Other crew members began arriving to pay their respects to their dying colleague, creating a steady stream of visitors that Arthur found both touching and profoundly embarrassing. Hash appeared among the visitors, his young face lined with guilt and sorrow. "Instructor Arthur," he whispered as he approached the platform. "I am so sorry. If I had acted more quickly, perhaps the medical team could have prevented this tragedy." Arthur managed a weak smile for his former trainee. "Hash, you did exactly what you were trained to do. You followed proper emergency protocols and you tried to save my life. No one could ask for more than that." Hash's skin flushed with a mixture of gratitude and continued guilt. "You are kind to say so, but I cannot help feeling that I have failed you somehow. Is there anything I can do to ease your final hours?" Arthur was about to respond when he was struck by a sudden thought. Hash's question about easing his final hours had reminded him of something important about Bordos culture that he had learned during his orientation sessions. The Bordos had a concept called territorial semi-solitude that governed their behavior during times of serious illness or approaching death. When a Bordos was dying, it was considered proper to allow them periods of privacy in their personal quarters, to contemplate their approaching transition, and to say private farewells to their possessions and personal spaces. "Actually, Hash," Arthur said slowly, "there is something you could do for me. In human culture, we have a tradition similar to your territorial semi-solitude. When someone is in my condition, it's considered important for them to spend some time alone in their personal space to prepare spiritually and emotionally for what's to come." Hash's eyes widened with understanding. "Of course, I should have thought of that myself, Dr. Kilvash." Human Arthur is requesting territorial semi-solitude in accordance with his cultural traditions. Dr. Kilvash looked up from her monitoring station, her expression thoughtful. "That is indeed a reasonable request, and one that aligns with our own customs. However, given the severity of human Arthur's condition, I am reluctant to move him from the medical bay where we can monitor his vital signs." "What if we established a monitoring link to his quarters?" Hash suggested eagerly. "The medical sensors could be networked to maintain observation, while still allowing him the privacy he needs for his spiritual preparations." Arthur felt a surge of hope as Dr. Kilvash considered this suggestion. If he could just get back to his quarters, away from the constant medical attention and well-meaning visitors, perhaps he could find a way to end this misunderstanding once and for all. "Very well," Dr. Kilvash said finally. "I will authorize a temporary transfer to human Arthur's quarters, with full medical monitoring maintained remotely. However, if his condition deteriorates further, he must be returned to the medical bay immediately." Within minutes, Arthur found himself being carefully transported back to his personal quarters on a mobile diagnostic platform. The room had been hastily equipped with additional monitoring equipment, but it still felt like a sanctuary compared to the intense scrutiny of the medical bay. As soon as the medical team had departed and the remote monitoring systems were activated, Arthur carefully climbed off the diagnostic platform and made his way to his personal computer terminal. If he was going to resolve this situation, he needed to access information that would convince the Bordos medical team that human nosebleeds were harmless. Arthur's fingers flew over the keyboard as he accessed the ship's database and began searching for information about human physiology. He knew that somewhere in the vast collection of scientific data maintained by the Bordos, there had to be detailed information about human biology, including the various minor conditions that could cause bleeding without indicating serious illness. After nearly an hour of searching, Arthur finally found what he was looking for: a comprehensive medical database entry on human nosebleeds, complete with detailed explanations of causes, symptoms, and treatment protocols. The entry clearly stated that most nosebleeds were minor occurrences caused by dry air allergies or minor trauma, and that they rarely indicated serious medical conditions. Arthur copied the relevant sections of the database entry and prepared a detailed message explaining his condition. He included references to multiple medical sources, photographs of the human nasal cavity, showing the delicate blood vessels that were prone to minor bleeding, and even video examples of humans experiencing and treating nosebleeds. Just as he was about to send the message to Dr. Kilvash, Arthur heard voices in the corridor outside his quarters. Through his door's audio pickup, he could hear crew members discussing the arrangements for what they called his transition ceremony. Arthur realized with growing alarm that the Bordos were not simply waiting for him to die, they were actively planning his funeral. Arthur decided that direct communication might be more effective than a data transmission. He activated his quarters intercom system and connected to the ship's general announcement network. "Attention all crew members," Arthur said, trying to keep his voice calm and authoritative. "This is Engineer Arthur Martinez. I need to make an important announcement regarding my current medical status." Throughout the ship, Arthur could hear the sounds of activity stopping as crew members paused to listen to what they believed might be their dying colleagues' final words. "I want everyone to know that rumors of my impending death have been greatly exaggerated." Arthur continued, borrowing a phrase from an ancient Earth writer. "What has been interpreted as a life-threatening medical emergency is actually a minor condition called a nosebleed, which is common and harmless in human physiology." Arthur could hear murmurs of confusion and discussion breaking out throughout the ship as crew members tried to understand what he was telling them. "I am transmitting detailed medical information to Dr. Kilvash that will explain exactly what has happened and why there is no cause for concern. I appreciate everyone's kindness and support during this misunderstanding, but I can assure you that I am in perfect health and will be returning to my normal duties shortly." Arthur closed the intercom connection and immediately transmitted his compiled medical data to Dr. Kilvash's personal communication device. Then, he sat back to wait, hoping that the combination of his public announcement and the supporting medical data would finally convince the ship's medical staff that this had all been a case of mistaken identity. However, Arthur's relief was short-lived. Within minutes of his announcement, his quarters door chimed with an incoming visitor. Arthur opened the door to find Dr. Kilvash standing in the corridor, her scanner device in hand, and her expression filled with concern. "Human Arthur," Dr. Kilvash said gently, "I received your transmission, and I understand that you believe your condition is not serious. However, I must tell you that we have seen this pattern before in Bordos patients experiencing severe blood loss. The initial stages often include periods of apparent recovery and cognitive clarity, followed by rapid deterioration." Arthur stared at Dr. Kilvash in dismay. His attempt to explain the situation had been interpreted as further evidence of his medical condition. To the Bordos medical team, his calm, rational explanation was simply another symptom of the delusional clarity that supposedly preceded death from blood loss. "Dr. Kilvash," Arthur said desperately, "did you review the medical data I sent you? The information clearly explains that human nosebleeds are different from Bordos bleeding. The anatomical structures are completely different, and the implications are not the same." "I did review your transmission," Dr. Kilvash replied. "However, medical databases can be misinterpreted by patients suffering from the cognitive effects of blood loss. What you have described as normal may actually be your mind's attempt to rationalize a traumatic situation. Arthur realized that he was trapped in a circular argument. Every piece of evidence he presented was being reinterpreted through the lens of Bordeaux's medical understanding, and his rational behavior was being viewed as a symptom rather than proof of his health. "Doctor," Arthur said, trying a different approach, "what if we contacted a human medical facility for a second opinion? Surely you would trust the assessment of human medical professionals regarding human physiology." Dr. Kilvash considered this suggestion for a moment. "That is indeed a reasonable proposal. However, given the critical nature of your condition, I cannot delay treatment while we wait for external consultation. The bleeding you have experienced indicates massive internal damage that requires immediate intervention." Arthur felt his frustration mounting as he realized that the Bordeaux's medical team was so convinced of their diagnosis that they were unwilling to consider alternative explanations, even from human medical experts. Their concern for his welfare was actually preventing them from discovering the truth about his condition. As if to add insult to injury, Arthur felt another familiar tickling sensation in his nose. The stress of the situation combined with the continued dry air circulation in his quarters was triggering yet another minor nosebleed. Arthur quickly reached for a tissue from his personal supplies, but he knew that any visible bleeding would only reinforce Dr. Kilvash's belief that he was dying. Sure enough, as Arthur dabbed at his nose, Dr. Kilvash's scanner immediately began beeping with alarm signals. "The bleeding has resumed," she announced, speaking rapidly into her communication device. "I need the emergency medical team to report to Human Arthur's quarters immediately. The patient's condition is deteriorating faster than our projections indicated." Within moments, Arthur's quarters were once again filled with medical personnel, monitoring equipment, and the general chaos of an emergency response. He found himself being loaded back onto the mobile diagnostic platform, despite his protests, and he could see preparations being made for what appeared to be some kind of emergency surgical procedure. "Please," Arthur called out, as he was wheeled back toward the medical bay. "You have to listen to me. This is not what you think it is. I'm not dying. This is just a minor nosebleed that keeps recurring because of the dry air." But his words were lost in the rush of activity, as the medical team prepared for what they believed would be a last-ditch effort to save his life. Arthur could see Chaplain Hurst hurrying alongside the diagnostic platform, his ceremonial robes flowing behind him as he prepared to perform whatever final rites the Bordeaux observed for dying crew members. Back in the medical bay, Arthur watched in growing alarm as Dr. Kilvash and her team prepared equipment that he had never seen before. The devices hummed with ominous energy, and Arthur could see scanner readouts that seemed to indicate preparations for major surgical intervention. "Dr. Kilvash," Arthur said, his voice rising with panic, "please don't do anything irreversible. I know you think you're helping me, but you're about to perform surgery on a perfectly healthy patient." "I understand your fear." "Human Arthur," Dr. Kilvash replied compassionately. "But we cannot stand by and watch you suffer when we have the technology to help. The Advanced Arterial Reconstruction Unit may be able to repair the damage to your circulatory system before complete failure occurs." Arthur's eyes widened as he realized what Dr. Kilvash was proposing. The Bordeaux were preparing to perform major reconstructive surgery on his circulatory system, apparently believing that his minor nosebleeds indicated massive internal damage that required immediate surgical repair. "Doctor, please," Arthur pleaded. "Before you start cutting me open, can we please just try one simple test? Take a blood sample and analyze it. If I'm really dying from internal bleeding, my blood chemistry will show signs of trauma and blood loss. If I'm healthy, the analysis will be completely normal." Dr. Kilvash paused in her preparations, considering Arthur's suggestion. "A blood chemistry analysis would indeed provide valuable diagnostic information," she admitted. "Very well. We will perform a complete blood workup before proceeding with surgical intervention." Arthur felt a wave of relief as one of the medical technicians approached with what appeared to be a standard blood sampling device. Finally, he thought they would have objective evidence that would prove his health and end this nightmare. The blood sampling procedure was quick and painless, and Arthur watched hopefully as the sample was inserted into an automated analysis unit. Within minutes, the device began displaying results on a large monitor that everyone in the medical bay could see. "Blood chemistry analysis complete," the device announced. "All parameters within normal ranges for human physiology. No evidence of trauma blood loss or systemic distress. Recommendation: patient appears to be in excellent health." Dr. Kilvash stared at the results in obvious confusion. "This cannot be correct," she muttered, checking the calibration on the analysis unit. "The patient is clearly experiencing massive bleeding, yet the blood chemistry shows no signs of distress." Arthur could barely contain his excitement as he realized that the objective medical data had finally provided the proof he needed. "Dr. Kilvash, do you see the blood analysis confirms exactly what I've been trying to tell you? I'm not dying. This is just a minor nosebleed that looks much worse to you than it actually is." But Dr. Kilvash was still studying the monitor readouts, her expression troubled. "The blood chemistry is indeed normal," she admitted, "but that only deepens the mystery. How can a patient experiencing such obvious bleeding show no signs of systemic distress?" Arthur realized that Dr. Kilvash was so committed to her original diagnosis that she was now questioning the accuracy of her own equipment, rather than accepting that her initial assessment had been wrong. The objective medical evidence that Arthur had hoped would resolve the situation was instead being treated as an anomaly that required further investigation. "Doctor," Arthur said, trying to keep his voice calm and reasonable, "the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. The blood analysis shows that I'm healthy because I am healthy. The bleeding you've observed is coming from delicate blood vessels in my nose, not from any internal organs. It's a minor condition that requires no medical intervention." Dr. Kilvash was about to respond when the medical bay's main doors opened, and Hash burst into the room. His skin flushed with excitement, and his breathing labored, as if he had been running through the ship's corridors. "Dr. Kilvash," Hash called out, waving what appeared to be a datapad. "I have found something important. I accessed the cultural database and discovered information about human territorial behavior during illness." Arthur watched with growing curiosity as Hash approached the diagnostic platform where he was lying. The young trainee's excitement was palpable, and Arthur could see that he was holding a datapad filled with what appeared to be anthropological information. "According to this cultural study," Hash continued breathlessly, "humans experiencing serious illness often exhibit a behavior pattern called denial and isolation. They retreat to private spaces and insist that they are not actually ill, even when facing life-threatening conditions." Arthur felt his heart sink as he realized where Hash's research was leading. The young Bordos had found cultural information about human psychology that seemed to perfectly explain Arthur's behavior. Unfortunately, it was the wrong explanation entirely. "The data indicates," Hash went on, his voice filled with scholarly excitement, "that this denial behavior is a natural human response to the stress of serious illness. The patient may appear completely rational and may even present logical arguments for why they are not actually sick." Dr. Kilvash's expression shifted from confusion to understanding as she absorbed Hash's research. "Of course," she exclaimed. "This explains the contradiction between the obvious symptoms and the patient's insistence that he is healthy. Human Arthur is experiencing a psychological defense mechanism that is causing him to deny the reality of his condition." Arthur stared at Hash in dismay, realizing that his former trainee's well-intentioned research had just made the situation exponentially worse. The Bordos now had a psychological explanation for his rational behavior, which meant that any further attempts to convince them of his health would be interpreted as further evidence of his denial. "This is fascinating from an anthropological perspective," Dr. Kilvash continued, "but it also means that we cannot rely on human Arthur's self-assessment of his condition. We must base our treatment decisions entirely on objective medical evidence. Arthur's spirits rose slightly as Dr. Kilvash mentioned objective medical evidence. Doctor, you just reviewed my blood chemistry analysis, and it showed that I'm perfectly healthy. Yes, Dr. Kilvash agreed. But as Hash's research indicates, the human mind is capable of remarkable self-deception during times of crisis. It's possible that your psychological state is somehow influencing your body's stress responses, creating artificially normal blood chemistry readings. Arthur realized with growing horror that the Bordos had now constructed a completely self-contained explanation for his condition that accounted for every piece of contradictory evidence. His rational behavior was psychological denial. His normal blood chemistry was psychosomatic manipulation, and his insistence that he was healthy was simply further proof that he was dying. "You, Dr. Kilvash," Arthur said desperately, "please think about what you're saying. Are you really suggesting that my mind is somehow altering my blood chemistry to hide the fact that I'm dying? That doesn't make any medical sense." "Human psychology is far more complex than Bordos psychology," Dr. Kilvash replied thoughtfully. "Your species has demonstrated remarkable abilities to influence physical processes through mental discipline. It's not unreasonable to suggest that your subconscious mind might be attempting to maintain normal physiological parameters even while your body is failing." Arthur closed his eyes in frustration, realizing that he was trapped in an increasingly elaborate web of misunderstanding that grew stronger with every attempt to escape it. The Bordos medical team had now constructed a complete theoretical framework that explained every aspect of his condition, while still maintaining their original conclusion that he was dying. Just then, Arthur heard a commotion outside the medical bay doors. Voices were raised in what sounded like urgent discussion, and Arthur could hear footsteps approaching at a rapid pace. The doors opened to reveal Captain Zethros, the ship's commanding officer, accompanied by several other senior crew members. "Dr. Kilvash," Captain Zethros said in his authoritative voice, "I need a complete status report on human Arthur's condition. The entire crew is concerned about our colleague, and I need to know what we're dealing with." Dr. Kilvash straightened to attention as she addressed her commanding officer. "Captain, human Arthur is experiencing a complex medical emergency involving massive internal bleeding, complicated by psychological denial mechanisms that are preventing him from accepting treatment. His blood chemistry appears normal, but we believe this may be due to psychosomatic influences affecting his physiological responses." Captain Zethros approached Arthur's diagnostic platform, his expression grave. "Human Arthur, is it true that you are refusing medical treatment for a life-threatening condition?" Arthur looked up at the captain, recognizing that this might be his last opportunity to reach someone in authority who could order an end to this madness. "Captain Zethros, I am not refusing medical treatment. I'm trying to prevent unnecessary medical treatment for a condition that doesn't exist. What Dr. Kilvash has interpreted as massive internal bleeding is actually a series of minor nosebleeds caused by dry air. It's a common and harmless condition in human physiology." Captain Zethros studied Arthur's face intently, his multifaceted eyes seeming to search for signs of deception or delusion. "You certainly appear to be coherent and rational," the captain admitted. "However, Dr. Kilvash is our chief medical officer, and she has extensive training in emergency medicine. Are you suggesting that her medical assessment is incorrect?" "I'm suggesting that her medical assessment is based on Bordos physiology, not human physiology," Arthur replied. "The symptoms that indicate life-threatening bleeding in a Bordos are completely different from the symptoms that indicate life-threatening bleeding in a human." Captain Zethros turned to Dr. Kilvash. "Doctor, have you consulted human medical databases to confirm your diagnosis?" "I have reviewed available data on human physiology," Dr. Kilvash replied. "However, the patient's psychological condition may be preventing him from accurately describing his symptoms. Additionally, human medical databases may not account for the unique stresses of deep space travel on human biology." Arthur could see that Captain Zethros was struggling with the same circular logic that had trapped everyone else. The Bordos had constructed such a comprehensive explanation for his condition that every piece of contrary evidence could be explained away as further proof of their original diagnosis. "Captain," Arthur said, playing what he hoped might be his final card. "If Dr. Kilvash is correct about my condition, then I should be showing progressive deterioration over time. I should be getting weaker, more confused, and less coherent as I lose blood. Instead, I've been completely stable for hours with consistent vital signs and normal cognitive function." Captain Zethros considered this observation, his expression thoughtful. "That is indeed a relevant point, Dr. Kilvash. How do you explain the lack of progressive deterioration in human Arthur's condition?" Dr. Kilvash consulted her scanner readings, her expression troubled. "The patient's vital signs have indeed remained stable throughout the observation period. This is unusual for a case of massive internal bleeding." Arthur felt a surge of hope as he saw doubt beginning to creep into Dr. Kilvash's certainty. Perhaps the captain's question had finally identified the flaw in the Bordos's diagnosis that would bring this nightmare to an end. "However," Dr. Kilvash continued, "it's possible that human Arthur's species has evolved medical defense mechanisms that we don't fully understand. His body may be compensating for blood loss in ways that our scanners cannot detect." Arthur's heart sank once again as Dr. Kilvash found yet another theoretical explanation to maintain her original diagnosis. The Bordos seemed capable of creating infinite layers of speculation to avoid confronting the simple truth that they had made a mistake. Captain Zethros was about to respond when the medical bay's communication system activated with an incoming message. "Medical Bay, this is Engineering Section 7. We have discovered something unusual in Instructor Arthur's work area that may be relevant to his current condition." Dr. Kilvash activated the response channel. "This is Dr. Kilvash. Please report your findings." "Doctor, we found Instructor Arthur's sonic screwdriver, where he left it during the emergency. The device has a red substance on the handle that appears to be the same fluid that was observed bleeding from the instructor. However, our analysis indicates that this substance has been on the tool for several hours, and it shows no signs of the degradation that would be expected from fresh blood." Arthur's eyes widened as he realized what the engineering team had discovered. The original blood that Hash had seen on his screwdriver had been sitting there since the beginning of the incident, and it was not showing the chemical changes that would occur in fresh blood exposed to air. "This is significant," Captain Zethros observed. "If the blood on the screwdriver is not fresh, it suggests that human Arthur's bleeding may have stopped long ago, which would be inconsistent with ongoing internal hemorrhaging." Dr. Kilvash looked troubled as she considered this new information. "It is indeed inconsistent with active bleeding," she admitted. "However, it's possible that the bleeding is intermittent, occurring in cycles, rather than continuously." Arthur could see that even this compelling physical evidence was being rationalized away, but he also noticed that Dr. Kilvash's explanations were becoming increasingly complex and speculative. Perhaps the accumulation of contradictory evidence would eventually reach a tipping point where the simple truth would become impossible to ignore. Just then, the medical bay doors opened once again, and Arthur was surprised to see Chief Engineer Valdris enter the room. The elderly Bordos looked concerned, but determined as he approached Captain Zethros. "Captain," Chief Engineer Valdris said, "I believe I may have information relevant to human Arthur's condition. I have been reviewing the engineering logs from this morning, and I have discovered something that may explain what we have been observing." Arthur watched hopefully as Chief Engineer Valdris consulted a datapad filled with technical readouts and maintenance records. According to the environmental control logs, Chief Engineer Valdris continued, the humidity levels in Engineering Section 7 have been running approximately 15% below recommended levels for the past week. This is due to a minor calibration error in the atmospheric processing unit that we have been planning to address during the next maintenance cycle. Arthur felt his pulse quicken as he realized where Chief Engineer Valdris was heading with this information. The engineering chief had identified the root cause of his nosebleeds, the dry air that had been triggering his allergic reactions and causing the minor bleeding that had started this entire misadventure. Low humidity levels can cause a variety of minor health issues in different species, Chief Engineer Valdris explained. I consulted the Environmental Requirements Database for Human Physiology, and I discovered that humans are particularly susceptible to nasal irritation and minor bleeding when humidity levels fall below optimal ranges. Dr. Kilvash looked intrigued by this new information. You're suggesting that environmental factors may have contributed to human Arthur's condition. I'm suggesting that environmental factors may have caused human Arthur's condition, Chief Engineer Valdris replied. According to the Human Medical Database, dry air is one of the most common causes of minor nosebleeds, which are described as harmless occurrences that require no medical intervention. Arthur could barely contain his excitement as he realized that Chief Engineer Valdris had provided the missing piece of the puzzle that might finally convince the medical team of the truth. The engineering chief had not only identified the cause of his nosebleeds, but had also provided authoritative medical documentation to support the explanation. Captain Zethros studied the information on Chief Engineer Valdris's datapad, his expression growing more thoughtful by the moment. This environmental explanation would account for all of the symptoms we have observed, he noted. It would also explain why human Arthur's blood chemistry appears normal and why his condition has remained stable. Dr. Kilvash was clearly struggling with this new information. Arthur could see that the environmental explanation made perfect sense from a medical perspective, but accepting it would mean acknowledging that she had misdiagnosed a minor environmental reaction as a life-threatening emergency. The environmental factors are certainly relevant, Dr. Kilvash said carefully, but we must also consider the possibility that the low humidity triggered a more serious underlying condition. Human Arthur may have a predisposition to bleeding disorders that was activated by the environmental stress. Arthur realized that Dr. Kilvash was still trying to maintain some version of her original diagnosis, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. However, he could see that her confidence was finally beginning to waver, and he sensed that one more piece of compelling evidence might be enough to tip the balance. Dr. Kilvash. Arthur said, "There's a very simple way to test the environmental theory. If you increase the humidity in this medical bay to optimal levels for human physiology, the nosebleeds should stop occurring. If Chief Engineer Valdris is correct, that should be the end of the problem." Captain Zethros nodded approvingly. That is indeed a logical test of the hypothesis. Chief Engineer Valdris, can you adjust the environmental controls in the medical bay to optimal humidity levels for human habitation? Certainly, Captain Chief Engineer Valdris replied, moving to a control panel near the medical bay's environmental monitoring station. It will take approximately 15 minutes for the atmospheric adjustments to reach equilibrium. As they waited for the humidity levels to adjust, Arthur could feel the tension in the medical bay gradually shifting. The Bordos medical team was still monitoring him closely, but their earlier sense of urgency had been replaced by watchful uncertainty. Even Hash, who had been standing quietly near the entrance, seemed less distressed than he had been earlier. "Dr. Kilvash," Arthur said during the waiting period, "I want you to know that I don't blame you or your team for this misunderstanding. You were working with incomplete information about human physiology, and you were trying to save my life based on what you knew about Bordos medical emergencies. Your response was exactly what it should have been given your knowledge and training." Dr. Kilvash looked surprised by Arthur's words. "You are very generous, human Arthur. I fear that I may have subjected you to unnecessary medical procedures and considerable distress based on an incorrect diagnosis. The important thing is that we've learned something valuable from this experience," Arthur replied. "Now, you have detailed information about human nosebleeds that will be available if this situation ever occurs again. And I've learned the importance of understanding how my physiology might appear to other species." Chief Engineer Valdris looked up from the environmental control panel. "Humidity levels have reached optimal parameters for human physiology," he announced. The atmospheric conditions in the medical bay should now be suitable for preventing further nasal irritation. Arthur could already feel the difference in the air quality. The oppressive dryness that had been irritating his nasal passages was gone, replaced by a more comfortable level of moisture that should prevent any further bleeding episodes. "Now we wait," Captain Zethros observed. "If the environmental theory is correct, human Arthur should experience no further bleeding episodes as long as the humidity remains at optimal levels." They didn't have to wait long. Over the next hour, Arthur remained completely free of any nosebleeds or other symptoms. His vital signs remained stable, his blood chemistry continued to show normal values, and he displayed no signs of the progressive deterioration that would be expected in a case of serious internal bleeding. Dr. Kilvash monitored her scanners carefully during this observation period, and Arthur could see her professional skepticism gradually giving way to acceptance of the environmental explanation. "The patient has shown no signs of bleeding or distress for the past 60 minutes, Dr. Kilvash finally announced. "All vital signs remain within normal parameters, and there are no indications of ongoing medical emergency." Captain Zethros nodded with obvious relief. "Then it appears that Chief Engineer Valdris has identified the correct explanation for this incident. Human Arthur was experiencing minor environmental reactions, not life-threatening medical trauma." Arthur felt an enormous weight lift from his shoulders as he realized that the nightmare was finally over. The Bordeaux medical team had accepted the truth about his condition, and he would no longer be treated as a dying patient requiring emergency intervention. "Dr. Kilvash," Arthur said as he sat up on the diagnostic platform, "I'd like to help you update your medical databases with information about human nosebleeds and other minor conditions that might cause similar misunderstandings in the future." "That would be extremely valuable," Dr. Kilvash replied. "I will also be filing a comprehensive report on this incident to ensure that other Bordeaux medical personnel are aware of the differences between human and Bordeaux physiology." As Arthur climbed down from the diagnostic platform, he was surprised to see that a small crowd of crew members had gathered outside the medical bay. Word of his recovery had apparently spread throughout the ship, and his colleagues had come to congratulate him on his miraculous survival of what they had believed was a fatal condition. Hash approached Arthur with obvious embarrassment, his skin flushed with the pale coloration that indicated shame among the Bordeaux. "Instructor Arthur, I owe you an enormous apology. My panic and misunderstanding caused this entire incident. I should have listened more carefully to your explanations, instead of assuming that I knew what was happening." Arthur placed a reassuring hand on Hash's shoulder. "Hash, you did exactly what you were trained to do when faced with what appeared to be a medical emergency. Your quick thinking and adherence to protocol could have saved someone's life in a real emergency. The only thing we need to learn from this is the importance of considering species-specific medical information when diagnosing conditions in non-Bordeaux crew members." Hash's skin began to return to its normal purple coloration as he absorbed Arthur's words. "You are very kind to say so, Instructor Arthur. I promise that I will study human physiology much more carefully in the future." Chaplain Hurst approached Arthur with a bemused expression on his aged features. "Human Arthur, I must confess that in all my years of service, I have never had the experience of preparing funeral rites for someone who then recovered so completely from their alleged terminal condition. This has been quite educational from a theological perspective." Arthur couldn't help but smile at the chaplain's dry observation. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Chaplain Hurst. I hope dismantling the funeral preparations won't be too much trouble." "On the contrary," Chaplain Hurst replied, with what Arthur thought might be amusement. "It is always preferable to dismantle funeral preparations than to conduct them. I consider this a very positive development from a spiritual standpoint." As the crowd of well-wishers began to disperse, Captain Zethros approached Arthur with a serious expression. "Human Arthur, while I am greatly relieved that you are well, this incident has highlighted some important gaps in our understanding of human physiology and psychology. I want you to work with Dr. Kilvash to develop comprehensive medical protocols for human crew members that will prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. I'd be happy to do that, Captain, Arthur replied. I think we can create a reference guide that will help Bordeaux's medical personnel distinguish between serious, human medical emergencies and minor conditions that may appear alarming, but are actually harmless. Chief Engineer Valdris joined the conversation, his expression pleased, but thoughtful. I will also be implementing more rigorous environmental monitoring protocols to ensure that atmospheric conditions remain optimal for all species aboard the ship. This incident could have been prevented entirely if we had been maintaining proper humidity levels in the engineering sections. Arthur nodded gratefully. That would be very helpful, Chief Engineer Valdris. I had no idea that the dry air was causing my nosebleeds until you identified the environmental factors involved. As the medical bay finally began to return to normal operations, Arthur reflected on the extraordinary series of misunderstandings that had led to this situation. A simple nosebleed had triggered a chain reaction of cultural and biological misinterpretations that had escalated into a ship-wide medical emergency and funeral preparations. But as Arthur thought about the incident more deeply, he realized that it had also demonstrated something positive about the Bordeaux's crew. Despite their misunderstanding of his condition, they had responded with genuine concern for his welfare, professional competence in their emergency procedures, and sincere efforts to provide comfort and support during what they believed were his final hours. Hash approached Arthur one final time as they prepared to leave the medical bay. Instructor Arthur, there is one thing I still don't understand about this entire incident. If human nosebleeds are common and harmless, why don't humans have better procedures for preventing them? Arthur considered this question thoughtfully. Actually, Hash, we do have procedures for preventing nosebleeds. We use humidifiers to maintain proper moisture levels in our living spaces. We avoid environmental irritants when possible, and we take medication for allergies that might trigger bleeding. The problem is that I forgot to consider how different the ship's environment might be from what I was used to on Earth. Hash's eyes widened with understanding. So the real lesson of this incident is the importance of reading the manual, not just the technical manuals for equipment, but also the environmental and cultural manuals for living and working with other species. Arthur smiled as he realized that Hash had identified the core truth of their shared experience. Exactly, Hash. Whether you're operating a piece of machinery or trying to understand a medical condition, you should always read the manual first. And if you're working with people from different species or cultures, you should always make sure you're reading the right manual. As they walked together back toward the engineering section, Arthur felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The incident had been embarrassing and stressful, but it had also strengthened his relationships with his Bordeaux's colleagues and provided valuable lessons that would benefit the entire crew. And perhaps most importantly, Arthur thought as he felt the comfortable humidity levels in the ship's corridors, he would never again take proper environmental controls for granted. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from the most unexpected sources, even from something as simple as a nosebleed that refuses to stay in its proper place. The starship Bordeaux's GP-1 continued its journey through the vast emptiness of space, its crew a little wiser and more understanding than they had been that morning. And in the engineering section, the humidity levels remained at optimal parameters for human physiology, ensuring that this particular medical emergency would not repeat itself. Arthur returned to his duties with a new appreciation for the complexities of interspecies cooperation and a reminder that would serve him well in all his future endeavors. Always read the manual, whether it's for a piece of equipment, a medical condition, or simply for understanding the people around you.